So I have an interesting story to tell. I was actually on this stage just a couple of months ago from Cineplex as a client, and then I made a move to Thoughtexchange. So it's only been 6 weeks. So I'll be talking to you today about my experiences, and generally I think about a story that we all can relate to. You know, I initially started this out thinking it was the story of my organization, and then over time realized it's the story of every large organization. So I'm hoping you find yourself in here, and that we're gonna have some fun. You ready? Gonna give you some energy? No, because HR people can be tough. Yeah, we can be tough. So yeah, I'm looking for some love. All right, here we go. So here's the story of what happened with us. So we had a company that was focused on one business model. At the time, for up to 90 of the last 100 years. Is that a long time? Yeah, it was exhibition, movies. Everybody here goes to the movies? Right, this is a business I don't have to explain. So what happens in movies is that you have one business that's focused on one type of thing. You've got a couple of leaders that have worked together for years, come from the bottom, really know each other well. The company is all focused on one business model, and everything feels really tight. And then you get disrupted. So what kind of disruption do you think happens to a movie theater business? Well, you could say it's Netflix. I like to call it Netflixed, like it's a verb. Right, so you could be Netflix, you could be Airbnb, you could be Ubered. Who here is being disrupted right now? Hands up, being disrupted? If your hand's not up, it's because you don't know it yet. Okay, but this is what's happening. So what happens in disruption is that companies get nervous that their bottom line is gonna get, taken over by somebody else. So they start to acquire other companies, yes? Anybody? Yeah, you start to acquire companies and grow companies, and then this clear focus that you have when you are one business model turns into this. Now, what ends up happening with leadership is that the kind of leaders who ran this initial company, who knew each other and trusted each other and worked together forever, well, these guys are super, super tight, right? Yeah, our company's run by cats, right? And then what happens is that as we acquire all these businesses, we have all these executives that we brought in from those businesses. Then we realize we need talent from different areas because they don't know the business as well as that we thought we did, and we end up with this. So you have a leadership team and a company that used to have strong connections that worked one way that now looks completely different. And the challenge that we face as an organization is that most times this first kind of leadership tries to stay the same way in a very new and different business. Anybody? Yeah, exactly. So that's what's happening, is that we're not transforming the way we lead and run our organizations, even though our business model has completely changed. So we had a challenge here. One of our challenges was we had the same people involved in every single decision and every single project, yeah? Same people doing everything, even if this was no longer the businesses that they knew that well. We also needed to add our new voices to decision-making process. We had people we were hiring who were leaving. They were saying, listen, I was hired as a director, but I'm really a coordinator. What are they saying? They're saying that I'm not even allowed to make any decisions because everything here is done so centrally. We had a lot of locations. So we went from being very focused in Toronto, which is the Canadian center of the universe. Anybody here from Canada? Yeah. And so, now we had offices all over Canada and all over the US, and it was really hard to collaborate or innovate. Remember those cats, they don't even know who the other person is. So you have a lot of duplication of work and a lot of disconnect. And finally, people feeling undervalued. And I think that's what really stood out the most, is we saw a lot of our really new and exciting talent not being excited to stay with us. And we were having a lot of issues with retention because they did not feel the same connection to that core business as those first few people did. So, everybody here seen Back to the Future? Everybody? Because I'm about to spoil it. Okay, so in Back to the Future, what happens is that Marty McFly goes back to the past, and he starts to hang around with his parents, and he realizes that what he's doing right now is causing his future to no longer exist, right? Well, what a lot of organizations are doing right now is doing what? It's gonna cause their organization to not exist because they're using the same kind of leadership they used, the same kind of programs they used for a certain kind of climate and company that no longer exists, whether it's due to growth or due to disruption. So this was a huge concern for me. And so at November 2017, at a conference just like this, I met Thoughtexchange, and what I ended up learning, well, I swipe right. It's a Tinder joke. It's the wrong demographic, but I feel like if we can't relate to what the kids are talking about, then how are we ever gonna stay relevant? It's like I know what a meme is, you love it, right? I know what a meme is, and then my husband called it a mem, and my kids can never let it down. Yeah, it never stops, right? So I swipe right on them, and what they taught me is how technology can humanize the employee experience. And I have to say that this is a huge paradigm shift for me, because I started my career with flip charts and acetates. Yeah? Yeah, exactly. You love it, right? Exactly. And I thought everything has to be done in person. If there was an issue, I did a focus group. Yeah, that's me. And so the idea that I could use technology to bring people together really blew a lot of my beliefs out of the water. So what happened is that we had a huge issue with decentralizing decision-making. So as I told you, we had the same 3 cats that were making all the decisions. Now, if you ask them if we had a problem with decision-making, what do you think they said? No, why? Because they're making all the decisions. It's funny, when you're doing it all, you don't see that there's a problem. So we'd actually had 3 separate offsites where we put people in groups, and we did flip charts in the corner. Everybody? Yeah. And then we wrote down everything we were gonna do, and then the next year we were doing it again. And you know, I have to say, as somebody who flip charted for about 19 of the last 20 years, I'd love to see a time where we were making a vital business decision and somebody says, let's get out that flip chart from the last offsite. There was a really great point on one of them, no? What flip charts do is they become this yellow stack of paper of shame in the corner of your office that you said one day you're gonna actually type up, but you never do. And then when you're eventually moving offices, you sort of bury them at the bottom of the recycling bin, yeah? So this is all that great work. So here I am, I'm back at an offsite again. I'm literally like, all right, how am I gonna have this question? And so the question I wanted to ask is, how do we stop having a trifecta of power running every single decision? Now, I kid you not, when I did this in my company, I actually put the CEO, COO, and CFO's faces on their heads. Yeah, it was nothing like having the CEO's face on Wonder Woman's body. It was just priceless. But you know, if you can't laugh at yourself, what are you doing? So anyway, the question was, we have superheroes in most organizations who swoop in and save everybody from their dysfunction. All the committees and everything we put together that actually don't do anything. And the reason being is because they are the bottleneck. And so I wanted to ask this question. I wanted to say, how do we stop having heroes? This is not a sustainable business model, and it's incredibly frustrating for the people who thought they were hired to run this company. And so instead of doing flip charts, I asked this question: what behavior change do you think would have the biggest impact on our decision-making and delegation culture? How are we ever gonna learn to let go? And so I put it out, instead of on a flip chart, in a Thoughtexchange, which we'll do later, and I sent it out to the whole room. So these were executives. There was 90 of us, there were about 85 or 90 in the room. And we got 81 people to weigh in, which was almost 100% participation. This is all being done live. And they told us some things that were very different from what we typically see on flip charts. First, they said that we have an issue with figuring out what done looks like. Like, we would literally have a meeting where one team would say, this is my complete, and this would be on somebody else's delayed list. Yeah? It's like we're not even talking the same language about what a project looks like. We found out that we have too many leaders in meetings. It was kind of like lawyers, like you bring your VP, I bring my VP, right? It was like so you see the level of who's on there. And we also realized that we would have calls where you have 26 people on a call, and they would find out that the top exec couldn't make the call, and we'd all be like, well, I guess we should reschedule, because the 25 of us can't make a decision. You ever have that? So we ended up with that issue. We also found out that people don't know what role they're playing, RACI. And this was an interesting one, focused on accountability and not blame. There was a lot of sense that if a leader didn't know every detail about something, they'd be called out for it. And so what I ended up realizing is we thought we had a FOMO culture, fear of being missing out. But it turned out we had a fear of being called out, meaning that a lot of leaders were not letting go of things, because in a meeting, if you didn't know down to the 9th degree, that teeny number on slide 26, then you'd be told, well, you gotta get close to that, right? So there is a real desire to not let go, even if you wanted to. So after I did this exchange, we came out with these themes. Then I was said, well, maybe this is just the executive level. What happens to the rest of the company? So we went and we did a webinar version. We tried to do this really fast and asked everybody this decision-making question. What's the issue here around decentralizing decision-making? And although we went across all our businesses, across the country, Canada and the US, the results were identical. And that really surprised me. It was like a pervasive issue. So then I was able to get an org effectiveness initiative off the ground right away. We did a decision-making and delegation webinar for all leaders. And that was really, what decisions are you not supposed to be making? How do you find the lowest level who can make a decision and push it down? And how do we start talking about leadership in terms of how well they're pushing down decisions versus what they're holding on? So this was more of a mind shift, paradigm shift discussion. And then we said project management. The issue is that almost everybody's a project manager now, yeah? Yeah, and if you don't know how you're doing it, you're burning through resources. And this is why disruption's coming to big companies like what's happening here today, is that we're slow. We can't even figure out how to get a meeting. And if you want executives to make decisions, you're sometimes having your meetings 2 and 3 months apart, yeah? Because you can't get them in the rooms. So we had to figure out how to do that. Meeting advantage was really how to have the fewest number of people possible and have an effective meeting. And finally, we did RACI for everybody. And we said, if you don't know what role you're playing, don't go to the call, don't get on the phone, don't go to the meeting. Imagine that you're on a call, and it was like, before we do the call, we're gonna go around the room and we're gonna ask everybody, what are you for RACI? Are you responsible, accountable, consulted, or informed? And if you don't know, you can just hang up. You know what would happen? You're like, doo-doo, 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 doo-doo. Because half the calls I'm on, I'm really just excited to go shop at Banana Republic online. I don't even know why I'm there. It's just like a break, right? And so how do we do this is that we realize that if you don't know why you're there, get off. And that was a huge piece because that dropped our meetings, dropped the number of attendees in meetings. Projects had project plans, and we started pushing down decision making. And this is really how we started to get more diverse people involved. Because once you start doing this, you eventually become a group that's starting to engage diverse opinions. However, you knew there was a however here. We're gonna talk about this. So 10 Bob 10 is probably one of my favorite stories, and it's because it's something that has resonated for me since I was in my 20s, when I was getting trained by a guy named Steve, who is a former executive at a now defunct US company. And somebody asked him, why did he leave this prestigious job? And he said, well, we were in the middle of a huge transition of power, and they brought in a new CEO, Bob. And Bob had a huge business plan to sort of transform the company. He hadn't spent a lot of time there. He came in with big ideas. Then he hired a couple of his buddies on. Sing along if you know the words, right? And so they hired the buddies on, and Bob is getting a sense, because he's not a bad guy, that people are not buying into his strategy, but he doesn't know what the issue is. So he's like, I'm gonna get everybody around the table, and I'm gonna ask them what they think of my strategy. So he tells everybody, we're having this meeting, you're gonna tell me what you think, because I wanna know what everybody thinks. So Steve and his buddies are like, oh my God, we gotta do something about this. This is our chance to weigh into it. So they get around the boardroom table, and Bob goes around, he goes, okay, out of 10, I wanna hear what you guys think of my idea. So he goes to one of his guys to the right, and the guy says, what? I'll give it a 10, right? And then the next guy says 10. And then it goes to the third guy, who's one of Steve's buddies, and he's like, here we go. There's like a little pause, and he gives it a 10. And then the next guy gives it a 10. And then the next guy gives it a 10. And it gets to Steve, and he said from the smallest, weakest place inside of him, he says 9.5, right? So 6 months later, the new strategy's in place, the company starts to waver. By a year, it was going downhill. By 18 months, gone. And for me, 10 Bob 10 is a huge issue because leaders don't realize they are Bob. That's the terrifying thing. They think that I'm an open door guy, people tell it like it is. I've literally told this story to the Bob that I'm currently in front of, who's like, well, thank God we don't have that here. I'm like, no, you're Bob, and I'm gonna say something pretty scary right now. If you have a fancy enough title to be sitting in this room, you're somebody's Bob as well. All right? There are some points where you must admit that you get to a certain level in your career, and you might not have had honesty in a decade. Maybe from your spouse, your kids. But people at work don't. They align to power. And why do we align to power? Well, there's a lot of really good reasons, and that's that agreeing feels darn good, right? Why is agreeing so awesome? First of all, it's fast. When everybody agrees, you're like, well, that's great, we all agree. Give you 10 minutes back to your day. What happens when you're in one of these moments where you're about to end 15 minutes, everybody's like, I'm good with it, and somebody puts up their hand and goes, can we go back to slide 6? Yeah, we're having a moment there because we all really want to take out a gun and shoot this person. And I'm just saying that is that the minute somebody says, I'm not sure, I want to dig back in, maybe I don't feel so good about that, we start getting all itchy. Because we're like, you're gonna slow it down, and now you're being difficult. So we really train people to not tell us the truth. And I kid you not, I was at my kid's play. He was acting. They were doing it. He's 12. There was a bunch of 6-year-olds at a library. And it was about fairy tales. And one of the fairy tales, and I swear to you, this is just like so beautiful, was this big wolf. And his wolf wife tells him that he has bad breath. He's the king. And so he says, I don't believe you. I'm gonna go ask the other animals. And he goes and asks the sheep. And what does the sheep say? Everything's fine. Then he goes and asks the cow, and the cow says, your breath is great. And my husband turns to me and he said, oh, it's 10 bob 10 for 6-year-olds. Right? We're really being taught that when the sheep is talking to the wolf, he gives it a 10. Right? And so what do we need to do is if we really want to be as agile as our disruptive neighbors out there, we have to have a room for people to disagree when they collaborate. And we actually are not wired that way. And so I realized, like Ella in Frozen, that I had to let go. Let it go. What I had to let go of is let go of the idea that honest communication happens in rooms like this with 3 mics and a bunch of chairs. No offense. But if you're with your execs and they're doing one of these town halls and people think that you're hearing what everybody feels, they're not. They're hearing a very conjured up version that has to do with aligning to power and staying safe. So what I wanted to do was let go of this idea that even through forcing answers, through this kind of open dialogue, through surveys. Now surveys have a place. Surveys show you where the hot points are, where people are not happy, but it doesn't tell you what they really want you to do about it. Right? It just says that this is an issue. So when you force people into answering something by a survey or answering it by a forced choice, you're not allowing them to have their full freedom to express what they felt. And so we went and opened Thoughtexchange to all leaders. And we said, engage your people in a 2-way dialogue. If you really want to know what people think, find a way to solicit from them. So people ask things like, what are 1 or 2 things that you could do to make the biggest difference to our team and our clients? And you send it out to an entire group of people. Now you do this before a meeting. When you get to that meeting, the issues that are important are what you're going to be talking about because they've already floated to the top. So the meeting isn't around positioning, or if Bob says, you know what I think is important? I think we should have dog day at work. Everyone's going to be like, yeah, dogs are a great idea. Thanks, Bob. And you know what's interesting is often when an executive weighs in and says things like, hey, my opinion is the same as anybody else's, it doesn't matter anymore. Like, when's the last time a coordinator's idea ever overrode the CEO's idea? Never. It's actually impossible. So in this case, what happens here is when you're coming to discuss something, the group has already weighed in without bias or positional power on what they think the best idea is or the biggest issue is, and then that's what you spend your time talking about. Most meetings, we spend 45 minutes just sort of dancing around the issue, and then with 15 minutes left, we try to address what's really going on. Here's how you have an effective meeting. We also ask things like, what does great leadership look like? And so again, we're getting a more inclusive answer by asking a broader group of people to weigh in. And we saw that we had this shift where people were kind of cynical and feeling left out or sort of pushed to the side, and they started feeling like they were part of a conversation. Because a conversation is something that happens frequently, again and again. You don't ask questions once or twice a year and then go away. You're continuously engaging people so that they can participate in those answers and great ideas can float to the top. And that's really what improving collaboration is. Collaboration is when a large group of people can weigh in and get their stakeholder input quickly, give a prioritized list to you so you know what to act on. What is one of the reasons we don't ask for a lot of collaboration is because it takes time. So when we talk about collaboration, we think it looks like this. This is what we market. It's like this beautiful race where people hand off batons. Everybody knows what they're doing. They're highly focused. Nobody drops it. But collaboration in most companies looks more like this, right? And I'll ask you this. Finish this sentence for me. If I want something done right, I should do it myself. Really, collaboration is terrible, right? You're working with a bunch of people who you don't really know, you don't really like, right? You're annoyed that you're in this working group, and it's really just a series of meetings that just fizzles out eventually. So if we really want to make collaboration easy, we have to make it something that you can do quickly and that you can get everybody's input and it can be prioritized for you. So here's a great example of it. So typically when we did our leadership development, we would have all our general managers come in once a year, and myself and the operations team would argue over what training they needed. The operations team would invariably tell me they need data cube analysis, because you know that's what you're really excited to sit through. And I would say we need something like emotional intelligence, and then they generally would win. And so I said, like, why don't we ask the general managers what they want? And this way we had to have the agenda out on Friday, because everybody's late, just so you know, it's part of life. And I was like, I want to get their input. And they're like, we don't have time to get their input, because it's always about time. Collaboration seems slow. That's why we don't want to do it. And so I put out this question, what do you think we should do? And here was the really awesome answer. They came back quickly because they cared. And we found out that if we asked them what they want, our rating went from 3.5 out of 5, which is usually what training sessions got in the past, to 4.2. It's a 29% increase. And they told us that they wanted change management, stress management, and hospitality, because we're moving into sort of more of a restaurant-style service. So this was a huge score for me, 4.2. I was the #2 rated event on the 3-day conference, just after the night of free drinking. Hard to compete with that. But I could show a measurable piece here that when you engage people and you allow them to collaborate with you on what they want, they are then that much more engaged with what you give them. And this is really also an incredibly respectful way to treat your workers. And that's what inclusion is. Inclusion is allowing people to spread their own ideas as opposed to the ideas of those 3 cats. So there's this great quote by Verna Myers: diversity is inviting someone to the party, inclusion is asking them to dance. Inclusion is the hard part, just so you know. It's really hard to make it safe to have a different opinion. So one of the interesting things that we as HR people do not address is there's 2 paradigms going on right now. There's this new idea of inclusion and new ideas and innovation, and there's the old idea of fit, right? And what is fit? Anybody remember? That's our favorite word, no? That's the catch-all word for being fired, just so you know, is fit, right? And what does fit really mean? It means you do what? If you don't fit, what are you? Yeah, but what makes you not fit? You're different. You have different, you're the guy who says, let's go back to slide 6, and we could have gotten out of here 15 minutes ago, right? So what's really hard is how do you make it safe and inclusive is that you have to have ways around the fact that we're wired to give Bob a 10. We're wired to want to alienate the person who's different. We, in fact, like having people agree with us. So all these things work against having a lot of different ideas and opinions, unless you're a tiny company of 3 cats, which is why you're always so easily disrupted by somebody smaller. It's because they don't have all this dysfunction that is a natural occurrence of large groups of people. And although I've heard many companies say, we don't have an environment that requires this kind of anonymous feedback, I'm going to tell you that the human brain has not had an evolutionary change in 70,000 years. All right, so I don't know if your company, with your mission statement and your values, has managed to hack the human brain. Because we are risk averse and we are aligning to power, because that's how you survive. And so if we want to also be champions of different opinions, we have to find a way to get those opinions, and it's not the traditional ways. Diverse opinions slow things down and create tension. 2 things that organizations do not want to have, because if there's one thing everybody says they don't have enough of, it's time. So we can't slow things down. So we have to find a way as HR professionals to make it easier to be inclusive, because our very nature of our business wants us to go quickly. So here's a great example that I used Thoughtexchange for new leader onboarding. I actually did one for myself in my new role as well, is that there's a lot of new executives being hired, yeah? Yeah, how fun is that? Yeah, what happens when you bring in a new exec to an existing team of people who've been there a long time, who worked for the other guy for 20 years? What happens? It's really tense. And again, the new leader is onboarded and hired by an executive team who tell you one side of the story. And you know that companies, in my version, there's 3 different companies in every company. There's the top levels version, there's the mid levels version, and then there's the people who work the front lines, yeah? They actually work for 3 different companies. If you look at their engagement results, it's as if they're working in 3 different universes. And so what happens is that you get onboarded by the execs who live in the top universe, the 3 cats who think everything's fine. Right? And then you're like, they're cheering you on. Go change it, go disrupt, do everything you want. And your existing team's like, woo, woo, woo. You don't know what the company's really like. Come take a visit with us before you promise something's gonna be delivered in 2 weeks, right? We're back to my Bob story. So in my new leader onboarding, we were saying, okay, ask questions right away to your team, and especially if you have a dispersed team in a lot of businesses, because you're not gonna have your coffee love-in chat with them for a while. And when you do, again, there's not a lot of honesty in that first meeting, is there? No, because everybody's trying to make themselves look the best. The leader's trying to say, I'm an open door leader, I'm a great coach, and the other person's like, I just really want to work hard and move up, and meanwhile, nobody's having an honest conversation. So we were asking all our new leaders to say, ask a question. It comes from you, craft it how you want. And then we start getting answers like, I would love a set of expectations to know what you want from us. And hey, what's your work-life balance take? Because things are pretty tough for us right now. Now, these are questions you would never ask if you had a coffee with your new boss, would you? No, you wouldn't. And so the new leader then, on whether it's like an Adobe Connect kind of Zoom meeting, gets their entire team together and actually talks about what's on everyone's mind. And as I started doing this, I would get little IM messages like, Lisa's amazing, or Roger's the best, or you guys made a great hire. Because they're getting this really amazing connection that they would not have had because they're talking about the issues that matter to them. They're not positioning themselves. And then that leader, who might not actually face-to-face meet people for several months, gets that intimate connection with their teams and gets to respond to their situations. And then we have a lot of other real-time conversations. We went right down to our front lines. We said, hey, in 2020, what should we be offering? So instead, so we have this restaurant called the Rec Room that's kind of like Dave & Buster's, but like nice. Ha ha ha. And what happened there, I know if you love Dave & Buster's, that was a little bit mean, but it is Sunday afternoon, okay? So what happened is that we have a lot of older people deciding what the younger kids want. Anybody? There's nothing like watching a boardroom of old people talking about what the kids want, because their grandkids have showed them something on Snapchat. Like, I really like to know that the fate of my company is based on that conversation. Right? So what we said is like, why don't we start to ask the young people what other young people want? And then they can, and again, we used to say we can't do that because there's too much data. Because if you do a survey with comment boxes, you have what, like 45 questions, 70? Just shout out. How many questions do you have in your surveys? Like, offend me with your numbers. What are they? What? 49. 72, 49. I feel like I'm on an auction here. Now, you have that many questions. How many comment boxes? Oh, just one? You're good. Yeah. I would say we had like 8 sections and we had an open comment box. I would get 400 pages of comments, and some of them were like crazy manifestos. Like, I needed to go get like a coffee to read that one, right? But you use wine, yeah. So, what happens is, it's how do you even know what to do with all that data? And in fact, no matter what you choose to react to, it's never enough because you've collected this much and you're willing to do this much. True? Right? So then you spit out a deck that says everything's great, that doesn't reflect what anybody put in the survey. And this is why survey participation is low. People know that this is what, so when you do this, the difference is everyone sees what's happening. And they're like, oh my God, something's gonna happen, because they can see it all. So we did this, we did other ones. We said what projects or activities you should focus on. This was mine. What risks are we facing that I should address in our strategy? I did HR strategy for 9 years. I included only maybe 4 cats. Right? My 4 cats that love me. This is the first time the payroll coordinators got to weigh in on our strategy. That's what inclusion is. You have to actually go out there and say, I want to hear from you. And then when you get their opinion, you're not like, well, that was from payroll, because I don't know where it's from. So as long as it's an awesome idea, it's going to float to the top. And for me, it was amazing to make my first HR inclusive strategy, which is crazy because diversity inclusion was under me, but I wasn't an inclusion kind of person. And I didn't recognize that because I was so busy trying to go as fast as I can to give everybody back 15 minutes at the end of every meeting. So as we grow, we all suffer from head in the sand, so don't feel bad if this sounds like you. It's just a function of being a large corporation. The people who think they were very connected just naturally become so disconnected that their version of reality is so dramatically different that the projects and processes and decisions we make are not necessarily catered to the real needs of the people we're serving. Here's an example we had. We had an issue with developing people. So we had a system where you could put in development plans that was mostly empty, unless we threatened you. Anybody? Yeah, hands up. Come on, don't make me feel bad, right? So we have this system. And so we start speculating that nobody cares about development, the millennials aren't loyal, they don't want to stay and grow their career. Sing along, yeah? And then so we ask them, what's getting in the way of developing your people? This is going to be a little bit painful. I'll give you a moment to read it. .7 is a high rating. So traditionally in an old survey world, you know what would have happened? The leader, I would have shown this to one of the top people and they would be like, who said that? Where'd that come from? What, yeah? What business, what state, what person? Why does this person still even work here? They hate it. Yeah? Right, that's what we would do. We basically marginalize and diminish the value of that feedback because we don't like it. But something crazy happens in Thoughtexchange, and that's they do this terrible thing where they show you what the agreement's like. They said, yeah, you have two groups of people. You have a group that's kind of rating everything low. They're kind of pissed off. And you have a group that's rating everything high. They're super engaged. And guess what? Everybody agrees with this. Yeah, your stars feel this way. Now, this is when you wake up. When you realize that you don't have to be, you can disagree with your company and not be disagreeable. You can still love working there, but be unhappy with some of the things we're doing. And we had never left room for that. For us, only the good comments come from the good people and the bad comments come from the bad people, and that gave us a reason to never really do anything. So when I came back to leadership and said, everybody believes in this, they said, okay, we've got to do something about this. And what can you do? We just got people in a room, literally at a conference, and we called it the elephant session. And we said, what are all the elephants? Like, what is going on that we're disconnected from? And you can't always solve. And one of the first questions I usually get is, well, what if you get up to the top, something the company's not willing to do? Well, then why don't you just ignore it like you've always done? And I'm being, it's irony for you right now. What happens is that you still have to talk about it, even if you're not going to handle it. You can talk about it and say, we're just not financially ready to give everybody raises, but what else could we do to show that you matter? You just have a respectful conversation because the conversation's happening right now without you. It's happening on Glassdoor, it's happening internally. So you have to decide, do I want to be part of the conversation or pretend it's not happening? And that's such a powerful thing because when you connect with your people and they feel truly safe, valued, and heard, they're going to share their best of themselves and they're also going to share their biggest concerns. Now, I want to do a thought exchange, but I got this article sent to me by a colleague from HBR. And it really pulls things together because I like to make a lot of jokes at these things. And I often say we're not saving lives here, so let's have a little bit of fun. But I thought this really drew out exactly what can happen when you have a culture where people don't feel they can speak up. So I'll give you a moment. I think we're all familiar with what happened. And this isn't unique to Boeing. I'm not even to call them out at all. This is what's happening in companies all over North America, all over the world. So we have an opportunity to change that. We have an opportunity to disrupt this pattern, to stop being Bob. And in order to do that, we sometimes have to bring in some help to get us closer to our people. So with that, I'd love for you to participate in my exchange. So you can get out your phones. I'm going to be asking you this question. So here we go.